Hi, folks, and thanks for joining us here at SomeFuture for episode 26 of our podcast. We're your hosts, Jack and Chris.
Hey, hello.
Hey, what's up, man?
Chris. Just on the mend, you know.
Yeah, well, hey, I have some exciting news, like super exciting news.
Wonderful.
We've got cool things to talk today about. So I'm excited. I think I messed that up. To talk about today. We've got some cool things to talk about today.
Yeah, heck yeah.
So on Present Futures, we'll be discussing the cleaning up of the environment and Elon Musk's recent Joe Rogan interview. On Paleo Futures, we'll be discussing the film Strange Days. And on FizBiz, we'll be discussing IoT investments and companies you need to pay attention to. As always, we hope that you enjoy our show, and please visit our website and blog where we post our supporting materials at www.somefuture.org. Follow us on our Twitter handle at SomeFuture, or visit us on our Facebook page, or simply connect with us on LinkedIn or Facebook. We always welcome your engagement with questions, concerns, ideas that you have. If you just want to complain, we're here for you guys. So listen to our podcast and email us. You can email us at somefuturepodcast@gmail.com or engage with us on social media. Now let's see what the future has in store for us at SomeFuture.
That's SomeFuture.
All right, Chris. So we make no qualms about our love of the environment and social justice, right? We both talk about that a lot.
We are definitely warriors of those. We're not social justice warriors. We're just warriors of climate change and social justice, if that makes sense.
Yes, there you go. Well, so instead of focusing on new technologies or a new clean way to get energy, new technologies and energy, I really wanted to use my present futures to talk about all of the different technologies and groups of people working to fix the damage we've already caused to our environment. It's something you don't hear often enough, and I think it's a shame, because if we can fix the damage that we've caused, won't that really help us in cleaning up our planet and righting the wrongs from the past several hundred years of deforestation and pollution and all these things climate change experts are saying are happening because of us? Why don't we try to work together and fix them? So there's actually an experiment going on right now that I wanted to bring up. It's what the experiment is in trying to do is rid the world's oceans of plastic waste. So roughly 9 million tons of plastic are dumped into the world's oceans each year, which, to give you a good picture of what that means, that is enough plastic to fill an NFL football stadium 23 miles high. So that's a lot of plastic. So the Ocean Cleanup Project is looking to change that. So it was first envisioned by an 18-year-old college student from the Netherlands named Boyan Slat, with the ultimate idea stemming from a 62-mile long and 16-foot deep floating barrier that is anchored to the bottom of the ocean. So think like an oil rig. It collects plastic, stores it in a tower, and then sits there to be picked up for recycling. Scientists expect the amount of plastic in the oceans actually to double in the next decade as developing nations increase their usage of plastics without adequate recycling. So ocean currents actually then push these plastics into large concentrated areas. One of the ones that I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with, or have even heard the name at least, is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is located between Hawaii and California. Right now, there's about 170,000 tons of plastic in this area alone. In fact, by 2050, there's supposed to be more plastic in the ocean than all fish. So it's supposed to be more plastic there. So there's about 5 or 6 of these different areas, but that's one of the ones that a lot of people focus on because it's right here by America. So in August of this year, the Ocean Cleanup Project deployed a 2,000, so not the 63-mile one they were looking at, but a 2,000-foot long and 10-foot deep beta called System 001 that they expect will collect about 5 tons of ocean plastic per month, which is no small number. What's more, they're hoping to deploy 60 more of these units. So instead of going for one large one, they've decided to go with these smaller ones, and they want to get those 60 units in about a year and a half, which they believe will clean up about 50% of the patch in 5 years, and then reduce it by 90% by 2040. So the current system 001, it cost about $24 million to make and run. So that's including collecting the plastic every 4 to 6 weeks. But the plan is to gain corporate sponsors over the next few years to add more systems to the ocean to make this a really feasible system. So, Chris, I mean, what do you think about this project? Have you heard of any other types of ocean cleanups, maybe outside of the ocean cleanup project? Because, I mean, plastic waste is only just one thing.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, the fact that we're actually taking this on, and it came from this high school kid Boyan, and now they've got some real kind of beef behind it, and it's starting now. I mean, I think this is completely fascinating, and this is sort of where capitalism and the planet meet, right? Because Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal, and Mark Benioff, the chief executive or CEO at Salesforce, they both invested in this. I mean, this is an ambitious plan to rid the world of trillions of dollars trillions of tons of plastic, all that is really just choking much of our ocean, floors, as well as, the ocean currents, right? To include that big, huge Great Pacific garbage patch that you were just talking about. I haven't looked at too many because I think this one takes up all the oxygen. You want something that has this amount of money sort of put into it, as well as, they've been talking about this for, I think, the last like 3 or 4 years. I mean, I remember when I first read this, this may have even been something that we read initially, when we first started the podcast, because I know we definitely have talked about the ocean's plastic problems for sure. But, I've gotten just really exceptionally excited about this. I do think, though, that we need to take a harder look at other parts of our oceans, so not just the plastic problem. Obviously there is the issue when it comes to the decaying of, life force areas, such as the Great Reef, the Great Coral Reef there in Australia. I know that it's been dying out, and there is some scientific endeavors in order to regrow coral around the oceans. And coral, of course, is extremely important when it comes to a bunch of different wildlife and fish life around, areas. I think another thing we probably need to take a look at, where maybe technology might not be able to solve it, but maybe social pressure, as well as some sort of global regulatory system would help, but also fisheries. I know fisheries are, we're at a sort of blinking red levels when it comes to certain types of fisheries and whatnot. So whether it is moving towards a more locally sourced, or sort of, kind of regulating the amount of catch that can happen in and around areas, and sort of tightening up those regulations, I think that's going to be particularly important. Perhaps even, doing kind of what they're doing with meat, right? Trying to figure out a way that we can produce fish-like meat that include the nutrients that we get from fish is particularly important. So I think overall, when I think about this story, it's obviously a feel-good one. I like to see sort of these ideas kind of come from, nowhere to somewhere to now it's happening. It's actually happening. We can actually watch it in front of us. But I think we got a long way to go when it comes to taking care of our oceans. I'm just glad that we've got this one step, sort of kick it off.
Yeah, I mean, you're completely right. There's so many things that we could talk about in the ocean that people are working on, and I mean that's kind of the point of our podcast. We understand that plastic is just one pollutant in the ocean. The point of our show is not to exhaustively list all of those technologies, but kind of to get our listeners thinking about other types of technologies or researching more of this themselves. It's kind of to let them know, hey, these are things out there that you should look at and pay attention to. Therefore, one other technology that I really wanted to focus on, or one area that I wanted to really focus on outside of the oceans, and I want to talk about the air. Obviously, the other thing that everybody talks about when it comes to, climate change and global warming, things like that. Specifically, I wanted to talk about carbon dioxide and monoxide, gases that are in the air. So obviously, as our planet continues to get warmer from gases spreading in our atmosphere, scientists have started to wonder if we can remove those gases at a level that will actually have an impact, and do so in a way that doesn't end up creating more waste and just a feel-good thing like our plastic story about Starbucks that we posted a couple of weeks ago. One system that I think we've already talked about was that the towers in China. So, they're building these towers that remove CO2 from the air around the city and, cleans the air, essentially uses it to either, they use that CO2 to either power the town or create something useful. I think that's pretty neat, but still, actually, many scientists are skeptical that a large enough operation could ever be launched that would actually make a significant impact. So a recent report by the European Academy's Science Advisory Council stated that CO2 removal only had limited realistic potential for climate impact. But still, this actually hasn't stopped groups of scientists, politicians, business owners from trying to band together to work on technologies or solutions to CO2 capture and removal from our planet's atmosphere, which is pretty neat. I mean, there are traditional methods of carbon capture. There's been existed for millions of years. If you're thinking about, planting forests and using minerals, both of those capture carbon and prevent it from being released into our oceans, into our air. Most recently there was a magnesite project which was created in Canada, which actually speeds up the creation of magnesite, which traditionally it traps CO2 at room temperature, meaning that CO2 could be sealed quickly and very cheaply. However, one method that I think is picking up a lot of steam is direct air capture. So, much of that technology is similar to what is used in carbon capture projects at power plants that have existed since the 70s. Using chemicals to bind with carbon dioxide molecules, then they're heated or otherwise treated to release them for capture. There's some really cool companies out there that are doing stuff with this. So there's a company called Carbon Engineering, and there's a company called Climeworks that have developed actually machines to capture carbon. But, if you think about carbon capture at a fossil fuel plant, where carbon dioxide can make up about 5 to 10% of the exhaust gases, that's one thing. They can easily do that. Like I said, they've been doing it since the 70s. But here's the thing: is the gas only makes up, even though say we're releasing tons of it into the air every year, it still only makes up about 0.04% of the atmosphere. So removing a significant amount of it would involve moving huge volumes of air through thousands of capture machines, and then powering those machines basically for decades. According to the Paris Agreement, even if all the goals are met, though, this is why this is important, because we're still facing a 3 degrees Celsius warm-up, which could lead to massive disruptions of the global population as coastal cities are swamped, increased dangerous weather patterns develop, the thing that recently happened in North Carolina. Some people are pointing to the increased hurricane activity we've been having here in the United States, to climate change. Therefore, we have to remove, somewhere around 10 billion tons of carbon emissions every year to even make a dent. In order to limit our current rise to about 1.5 degrees over the next decades, we have to pull out about 50 billion tons of these pollutants per year. So that's a huge issue, and it remains a big issue that we have to find a way to do this, and to do it not only to regulate our planet, but possibly give us the first signs of being able to influence our global temperature on a massively positive scale. Save the ocean's coral, talk about all these marine life that we could save that is being impacted by this right now. So obviously then what's the best solution? Actually, it's probably a combination of everything we've just talked about. If you're looking at reforestation, that's a quick way to do it. And I say quick by, it's something we can easily do right now. We could look at geological storage methods like what they were doing in Canada. Another method is called BECCS, which is taking carbon holding plants. So, think about quick growing plants, like bamboo or something like that, and then using them as an energy method to remove the carbon from the atmosphere and then storing that carbon from them deep underground. So you're basically taking the plants out of the ground, they've stored all this carbon in them, and then putting them underground so that they can't release the carbon back into the environment. But that's, really difficult to do because, there's the idea of, well, you have to grow the plants, and that's not really carbon neutral. So that's an issue there. Direct air capture, like I said, is probably the best long-term bet. But that's, right now it costs anywhere between $100 and $600 per ton to remove CO2 from the air. And that's based on the energy costs. So basically, one thing that we've talked about a lot is we're developing new ways of energy capture and creation. And so that's when this is going to be a really impactful thing. If we can get a cheap energy source that is easily available, that is, makes energy almost next to nothing, Like we could create thousands of these machines, and this could actually happen. We could remove, carbon dioxide from the air, and it could, all these pollutants from the air, and it could clean our air and possibly reduce the rising temperatures in the world. I mean, we could reverse what we've been doing to ourselves. So that's a great thing about this technology that I really wanted to bring up today. So, Chris, have you heard of any other types of technologies, that you wanted to mention here before we wrap up this segment?
I mean, honestly, you named so many that I'm sort of speechless, right? That I didn't bring as many to the plate here. I will say, just broadly, though, this is the type of conversation I think that we want to have when it comes to climate change. I think we get too bogged down in the why, like why is the planet heating up, and why are we having more, events like what happened in Hurricane Florence, and we're too combative in the camps, right? You don't care enough, and you care too much. The reality is we're going to have to do something, right? Mm-hmm. You have to do something when the hurricane comes in and it decimates your wildlife and your ecosystem as well as your highways. Things like the desertification of certain areas. Maybe there's more greenery in certain areas. So we actually have to just look at what the world is giving us, not only the climate and the changes that come from it, but also what we have to do to ensure that we have sustainable resources for our planet. So I think speaking about the solutions versus talking about the why, sometimes that's the best way to sort of take these ideas forward. So maybe we can just start to concentrate on solutions like you did, Jack, and I think we'll be in for a better world. Okay, so for my present futures, I want to pull something that I thought was pretty timely, and I mean, you know what it is, Jack, right? It's it's two of my favorite people on earth. One is the reason why I dreamed to do a podcast. And when I found a podcast partner, I was like, heck yeah. So Joe Rogan, he's one of my heroes. I really like the dude. He's MMA commentator, stand-up comedian. He hosts the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, where he has all sorts of guests from, Neil deGrasse Tyson and, conspiracy theorists like Graham Hancock and hunters and MMA people and stand-up comedians. He had Anthony Bourdain on there. I mean, he's a businessman too. I'm just a big fan of his comedy and just him and himself. And I think he got particularly lucky where he started doing a podcast, probably 8 years ago. And as podcasting became sort of prevalent and something that people got into, he was just in the right place at the right time. And oh, by the way, he had all these sort of, connections. And what do you know? Those connections also allow him to connect with other super cool people like Elon Musk. So Elon Musk comes and over to the Joe Rogan Experience. And of course, Elon Musk, I mean, he is no... He's definitely been on. He hasn't been on our podcast, but we definitely spoke on him SomeFuture quite a lot. So of course, Elon Musk, he's the business magnate. He wants to be a magnet, but I think magnate and investor. He holds a South African, Canadian, U.S. citizenship. Of course, he's the founder and lead designer of SpaceX, the co-founder, CEO, and principal architect of Tesla, the co-founder, CEO of Neuralink, which is the neurological connector where he's going to connect us with AI. That's a company that he's doing. And of course, he was one of the co-founders of PayPal, one of the PayPal mafia. So these two titans of their different industries, I guess, met 2 weeks ago. And boy, oh boy, it just set off all sorts of, stuff out in the mediascape because they smoked marijuana. Oh boy. Elon Musk and Joe Rogan. What? Joe Rogan, who smokes marijuana, and that, well, not only that, they drank whiskey too, right?
Oh my gosh.
Oh geez. So they
lost
drank
half their listeners.
They drank whiskey. He ended up smoking. He smoked one little puff from marijuana, and the Tesla stock slumped, and people were saying he needs to leave. All this sort of stuff, and you heard all the chaff over the last couple of days. And you know what? I listened to that podcast. I wanted to talk about it. This podcast actually was extremely like informative, deep. They talked about a bunch of different things. So I figured I'd just kind of break apart some of the things that they talked about. One was, obviously the Boring Company. So yet another idea that Elon Musk has going on. So the Boring Company, it's not boring, like it's not exciting, meaning boring like under the ground. So Elon was talking about how far they went and how, it took a lot of time to dig a hole. He had to get a lot of paperwork to dig a hole there on the company headquarters there of Tesla. And now they actually have a mile-long hole that he has walked down going under Los Angeles. And the idea around the Boring Company is to essentially take the traffic underneath. I know we've spoke about this on the podcast before. Oh, yeah. And, it was interesting, too, because when we talked about the Boring Company and, how it would be a terrible place to put it in L.A., structurally, and this was very interesting. This is what I found interesting on the podcast. He said that the boring is actually good. It's actually good to have tunnels underneath L.A. It's actually even more safe because earthquakes are actually a surface issue. So very much like waves on the ocean, waves happen at the very top, right? So the best place to be in a storm or in any sort of huge, tsunami system is actually under. It's actually in a submarine. So you're never going to be moved at all. So, the way they're envisioning the Boring Company is having a, bunch of interconnected tubes that allow people to transport properly in major metropolitan. So it's not just LA, but, I think they're talking about possible systems in Chicago, maybe New York, along the Sailor Corridor. So, that was one big chunk of the conversation. They were talking about the Boring Company, the stuff there. They talked about personalized transport. I don't know if you noticed this. He was talking about, possibly a personal transport plane where you could, essentially he was saying you would need a lot of energy to transport yourself up. But the best way to move is actually not two-dimensionally like cars are moving right through traffic, but actually in the three-dimensional space, there's way less traffic. And, I know you're always talking about flying cars. So he was saying that the best way to have sort of vehicles is for everyone to have sort of a vertical takeoff and landing kind of vehicle. You would shoot off and go to a certain gravity. And what they can do is they could use geospatial, recording equipment, and you can then use gravity's potential energy to allow you to pretty much just zoom wherever you want. So you can just imagine sort of personal machines in a town or city, and you just sort of take off, and then almost kind of like the Jetsons. So very futuristic type of conversation they're having on personal travel. They also, of course, talked about his company, the Neuralink, and what it would be like to be a part of AI, whether we were in a simulation or not. So they got a little deep there. I think the whiskey was definitely flowing by that time for sure. But what's interesting about this was that what he talked about, how AI and the idea of a cybernetic organism, that they talked about how we're all cybernetic organisms. So a company is just a cybernetic organism. It's just a bunch of data and processes moving towards a particular direction, sometimes moving efficiently, sometimes not. So he talked about, obviously, the best way in order to beat AI is to become AI. And so that's why Neuralink and the idea of, pretty much attaching our brainstem to the ones and zeros world out there for, instant communication and instant computation is great. And of course, he talked about how we already are cyborgs, right? The information that you have on your phone is connected to everything. You are that much smarter, your calculations are that much quicker. And if we're able to sort of connect ourselves with this new AI world, that humanity will be able to achieve that much more. So, these are just sort of 3 or 4 different conversations that they had. I mean, they had a couple other interesting ones. He was talking about how the Boring Company, they sold these flamethrowers. I don't know if you saw that, but
Oh yeah.
they bought these flamethrowers in order to raise money, and they're sort of not flamethrowers, but they are flamethrowers, but they were able to successfully sell them. So that was particularly interesting. I really thought, when I heard about the conversation before I listened to it, and then I listened to it initially, and I'm like, you know what, I need to listen to it again because I want to talk about it on the podcast. They talked about a lot of like super interesting things. I mean, I don't know. What did you think of the conversation?
All right, so Chris, I have like a love-hate relationship with Elon Musk. I mean, even though he doesn't even know who I am, but it's the kind of thing where, so you and I we've talked about the Boring Company. Obviously, I've let it known that I just think that's probably just his big ploy to get boring machines on Mars to make tunnels for people to live in, or to create subterranean stuff like that. And I looked at some of the of what he said. I like some of it. Obviously, I've been talking about flying cars for years. I mean, it just makes complete sense that you have, instead of two-dimensional driving, this is what I've been saying, for years, is you have 3 dimensions where you can drive, or multiple dimensions where you can go up and down, and there's going to be less accidents, at least with people impacting each other because you have more space up there. Obviously, that makes sense. I'm surprised he mentioned that because he has not been for flying vehicles. He thought that it was not going to really be a thing. There's multiple articles of him saying, it's not going to happen. So it's interesting that he's now mentioning that, and as far as like his Neuralink thing, I think that's pretty cool. The idea of a computer brain interface. I mean, he's not the first person to work on those. Sony's been trying to create computer brain interfaces for years and decades even. But I like, he said basically the purpose of Neuralink is to create like this high bandwidth interface to the brain such that we can be symbiotic with AI, which is what Musk has been advocating. There's these great titans of industry who say, AI is going to do this, or you should be afraid, or you should like AI. Musk wants to combine humanity with artificial intelligence to make us this, essential cyborgs of, all of these things, be able to be smarter, access information at the tip of our heads, all of those things. I like that aspect of the conversation. I really like what some of Musk can do. He is very much a figure in our society where he can be a polarizing figure sometimes with this. He's said he's going to take Tesla private, and he's smoked a cigarette laced with weed. I mean, it wasn't even a joint or anything like that. I just think that I like what he says some of the times, but some of the times I just feel like his whole end game for all of this is to get to Mars. And I think that's great because, you heard about how he just he just tapped a Japanese billionaire to be the first guy to fly around the moon. I think it's the first person to visit the moon since the 60s or the 70s. So that's pretty neat that he can get somebody, or maybe the 80s, but 30 plus years that he can now we're sending someone back, and it's privately funded, and they're going to send a bunch of artists around the moon. I think that's pretty neat stuff. I think what he's able to accomplish with his notoriety in a way is that he's able to start these companies and to be that thinker. He even says, you're right. He talked to Joe, and he said, I've got all these ideas in my brain. I'm an idea guy, and I can definitely, share that idea with him, and I'm very happy for his success, but I'm also interested to see what he says in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. The guy is a thought leader for sure. I like how he's a smart guy too, right? And he's an engineer. You need engineers now in the information age, in the age where we can use AI and use IoT, and we need smarts. We don't need dumb. We need smarts. And if anything, I think this guy needs to take a day off every now and again. Probably needs to stop sleeping under desk.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily have to smoke a big doob with Joe Rogan in order to gain some interesting insights. But I thought this was a extremely insightful conversation. I'd highly recommend it to those who were, pushed away because of, the silly nature, right, that you initially thought about it. I actually talk a lot about deep interesting concepts that are changing our world, everything from AI, whether we live in a simulation, climate change, all of these, the running a major car company, which is something obviously totally interesting. I mean, it's kind of like having like a Henry Ford sort of character, but having a podcast from him and being able to take 2 or 3 hours out of his day to discuss what he was all about. Just a great way to see the inside of two crazy minds, and I highly recommend checking out the Joe Rogan Experience and listening to see what Elon Musk has to say. Okay, so for Paleo Futures, we've got the film Strange Days, 1995 American science fiction thriller, directed by Catherine Bigelow, who directed The Hurt Locker, and what was the one movie with, not The Hurt Locker, but the other post 9/11 movie? She did one where it was the attack that killed Osama bin Laden. I forgot.
Oh,
yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, she directed that as well.
SEAL Team 6.
Yes, but it wasn't that title. We'll put it in the credits. So anyway, this is written by James Cameron, so the super famous director. I think they were husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. He came up with this idea actually in 1986, was a nice little factoid. And it stars Ralph Fiennes, Angela Bassett, Juliette Lewis, Tom Sizemore with a crazy blonde wig. Really just cool, funky movie from 1995. Now, when I watched it, because I was thinking about it, I'm like, you know what? We need a Paleo. We haven't had a movie to watch in a while. And I started to remember this sci-fi movie in 1995 that was about virtual reality. So essentially, they have these things. It's this movie, Strange Days, is about the last 2 days of 1999. So it came out in 1995. So it's definitely, future, only 4 years in the future. But LA is a dangerous war zone, right? So this is very much the post Rodney King, post LA riots, LA at the time. And there are gangs of criminals all over the place. An event is recorded by this robber who's wearing this thing. It's called a squid. So essentially what a squid is it's sort of kind of like the pre-Neuralink that Elon Musk is talking about, where it's electrodes that are attached to the wearer, and it turns their eyeballs into pretty much a video recording device. So this is stuff that they also have in Black Mirror episodes as well. SQUID stands for Superconducting Quantum Interface Device, SQUIDs. So essentially, the main character, Ralph Fiennes, he is a dealer, right? Because this stuff is illegal and it got out. And, there's sort of this kind of love interest play with Juliette Lewis. She's his girlfriend, and he kind of relives his fantasies with her through this squid world. But it's super interesting because I think this is one of the first movies that tackles virtual reality from sort of being in it versus kind of watching it. I think I remember other virtual reality sort of ideas or movies. There's Virtuosity, and there was the Lawnmower Man and these sorts of things. I remember the graphics was very blocky, right? And I think remember the virtual reality world of the 90s and going even into the early 2000s, the graphics weren't very good. It's not what the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive is right now, right? Where you have the beautiful HD and you're literally in another world. That the technology just wasn't there, right? We just didn't have the computing technology. Well, in Strange Days, when you put on one of these squid devices, you are there, right? So you can, at the very beginning of the movie, not a huge spoiler alert, but you go through what it's like to be in one of these, and what it is it's a first person sort of account. So it's kind of cool because I know there's been a bunch of first person movies lately that have been out there in movie land. So Catherine Bigelow really did a really kick-butt job in Strange Days of showing what it's like to be, behind a car chase or in a robbery gone bad, or, having sex with someone, right? And it's very kind of visceral when you see her camera direction. But in reality, that's kind of what Oculus and the HTC are trying to do now, right? And I think what's interesting about this is, currently when we think of virtual reality and we think of putting on the Oculus or using augmented reality or even thinking about things like Magic Leap, it's this kind of safe areas. There's like a whale jumping in the foreground, or you're able to see like additional data when you're going and searching for your subway or something like that. But Strange Days puts you in like truly visceral, exciting things, right? Like I was saying, bank robberies or holdups, or they call it blackjack, right? The ability to kind of take one of these discs and live through it. And so Lenny, he goes and he sells all his wares, to multiple people. He ends up getting caught up in some sort of, LA crime, whodunit sort of thing. And him and Angela Bassett, who's his go-to partner, are there to solve the case. So it's actually super fun movie. I think it really holds up. And to me, I think this is less about just the pure technology kind of, I know when we looked at Minority Report, we think, oh, wow, look at all the different ways that they worked with Futurist in order to foresee that future, in order to make it happen. But with this one, it was more, let's take one technology and let's talk about like how this technology can actually have a negative impact, or there could be, an issue with it. And what do you have? You have these people who are living in these virtual reality worlds. They're considered sort of scummy kind of people. And they even get, they get sort of messed up on this stuff. They get paranoid. They don't know what is reality and what isn't. And, even to the point where it seems there's illicit types of virtual reality that you can get, that you can be a part of, almost like snuff films that you could watch. So you can think there's even like a weird sort of subcategory that may come in the world of virtual reality that we're not even discussing. So in some ways, right, and I think I told you this before in a text, but before we even had this movie both is of its time. It's very 90s. It's sort of very, like when you look at the style and like the hairstyles and all that, it's very, very 90s, for sure. But it's also ahead of its time in terms of, how to connect in this virtual reality world and the whole Neuralink. And I think also too, how to deal with those worlds, both in and out of them, and how they would affect society. I was a big fan of Strange Days. I highly recommend it. You can watch it, I think, on HBO now. So Jack, I mean, what'd you think?
All right. So what did I think about it? So I hadn't heard about the movie until you actually told me about it. And I guess it was kind of, before my time, but I loved every second of it when I watched it after you told me about it. Like, I love the idea that it explores the idea of technology and like racial and social injustice. It goes into the VR aspects of it, but it's something that, we're just getting to the point right now. You may not be able to, think about it. You may not be able to live longer because it's going to cost you. There's that social injustice, wealth injustice. We're on the verge of that, where machines are going to impact the way that we live. I love the fact, though, that you brought up the VR aspect of it, because this virtual reality experience they're talking about, it's a completely immersive technology. So you can hear, you can see, you can pay people to do what you want to experience. Think about it. It's an idea of escape. You can do something immoral. You could do something illegal in virtual reality. We have all these war games right now, like World War II and all this, where we're shooting people and stuff like that. But what happens when it becomes so real and so visceral that, it actually feels like you're killing somebody, or, doing all these other crimes like rape that the movie explores, and all this different violence. At the time when I was reading about this, the movie was not well accepted because they couldn't understand why there was so much violence and why there was so much, what was going on. But I don't think they really realized, like, video game culture is so much bigger now than it was then. I bet you if you were a video game player, you could really get involved in this, and you could see like what video games were leading to. And a lot of that was these same different ideas of being able to be someone else, do something, feel something real, be able to, put yourself onto something. Think about it, being able to live as a different race or a different type of person in VR. I mean, the idea that you could do that is fascinating. And this movie really touches on a lot of those different aspects. And I do like at the end, though, is kind of your quintessential 90s movie, which is why you and I were talking about it, is that, it was the new millennium. They're going to ease racial tensions and all this stuff. And I was like, all right, that was kind of uncharacteristic of the rest of the movie. But I really liked the movie for all of those different reasons and more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head when you're talking about VR. To me, it's not, I think we think of VR as this wonderful play place, right? And I think that's where we're almost, VR is what, remember the NES when it first came out, and it was like happy little, guy in the toadstool, and you have Duck Hunt, and it's the fun, and there's no blood and anything like that, and it's always a safe place. But VR in the future, there will be black snuff VR. People will want to be a part of things that they could never do in real life, right? You could have virtual reality where there is death and torture and killing people, and along with also the positive uses of it as well. So I mean, obviously, I don't want to say VR is going to be this hellscape and keep your kids away from it, because it's just another means of experience. I do think, though, that Strange Days, it's not only fun, action, well directed, well written, well acted, but I think the insight that it has on our future day is what it is going to be like to be a part of another world, and how is it going to impact us socially. And to me, that's always my favorite types of futures movies, right? Is not just wow you with the technology, don't just tell you a good story, or hey, this is what it's going to be like to fly in a different planet or something like that. I mean, that's super interesting. But sometimes it's just taking a little bit of technology and seeing how it might be able to affect the social fabric, right? And how we can deal with it. To me, I think that makes Strange Days a fantastic pickup. Thinking you can watch it on HBO now. Take a watch if you can.
Want some money?
Hey folks, it's that time again for FizBiz.
FizBiz.
I said it at the same time you did this time. Okay. So let's just suffice it to say that if you've been listening to our show since the beginning, or if you're just a new listener, you need to realize that the advice we offer on here, while it may being the work of genius that it sounds like it is, in fact, sometimes Chris and I get things wrong.
Sure.
Probably a lot, actually. Probably more than half the time we get things.
Not on crypto. We were right on crypto. We're still right on crypto. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we get right, but there's a lot of stuff we get wrong too. So therefore, I have to say that if you may like our ideas, but you should really do your own research and investing, and just use our podcast as a platform to start your own search, and not as a canon for investing. So thanks, guys. That's just my little 2 cents there. So so today, Chris, I wanted to talk about the wonderful world of IoT. It's something that I'm quite passionate about, as I own my own IoT company. I work with IoT as a strategist. Therefore, I really believe that this is a space with remarkable potential for growth. So from the $150 billion plus that it's worth now, some forecasters are predicting that IoT will be around a $2 trillion business by 2025. Therefore, I want to explain briefly what IoT is, and then go into some companies making plays in that space, and either mention a product they're working on or why you should be paying attention to that company. So IoT, it's the Internet of Things. It is the network of physical devices, vehicles, home appliances, and other items embedded with electronics, software, sensors, actuators, and connectivity, which enables these things to connect and exchange data, creating opportunities for more direct integration of the physical world into computer-based systems, resulting in efficiency improvements, economic benefits, and reduced human exertions. So the concept is of a network of smart devices actually goes back all the way to like 1982 when a modified Coke machine at Carnegie Mellon became the first internet connected appliance. It was actually able to report its inventory and whether newly loaded drinks were cold. So that's a pretty interesting history of how long we've been dealing with IoT. The actual terminology of IoT came around like in the early 2000s. What people were trying to understand about IoT. And obviously, as computing power got more powerful and smaller, we were able to think, well, we could put it in devices and smart speakers, et cetera, cell phones, all of that. So I want to mention a couple of specific companies. We're going to go through this pretty quickly because there's a lot of them actually working right now on IoT because it's just worth so much possible money for all of these different companies. It makes sense for them to be investing millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars into these products. So one thing I want to discuss is IBM. So IBM obviously was one of the early players in artificial intelligence, at least in the idea of incorporating it into business machines and business problems, all of that. That's something that I think they're spending millions of dollars on their Watson platform to really develop this and make artificial intelligence and then put it into these IoT machines. So then basically what that does is it enables the data that is being produced from these to be able to disseminate it and understood and make processes more efficient. That's one thing. Or they'll sell the data so that people can target people a little bit better when it comes to selling them things. That's something that's a huge company that you want to look at, and definitely Intel, which makes the actual pieces of these machines because they have all of the chips that go into them. One company that most of our listeners may not have heard of is a company called ARM. So ARM is an IoT company. It is a company that is creating semiconductors that are used in IoT devices. It's creating chips called it's got a project called Project Trillium, which will offer machine learning capabilities inside IoT devices. A lot of companies are partnering with them because they have those chips that are going to be a game changer in IoT. Like IoT is still in its infancy, so these are things that are going to make it just explode. Obviously, another company people have heard of, AT&T. So think about whoever controls the internet service. They control all of the data the IoT devices are generating. They will act as basically the gatekeepers of that information, and they've got a lot of money poured into these different concepts of cloud and smart vehicles and smart cities. I mean, if you've been anywhere in smart cities, at least in the United States, AT&T has somebody there. They are, they're really learning what's been happening. I mean, if you look at what's happened with Facebook recently with data and data security, and I mean, data's king. That's the truth of it. Two more companies that are very similar. One is called Datadog. So Datadog is an AWS partner. It's created a data dissemination software platform that will allow companies with IoT devices to control and access the data they are collecting and provide it to companies in an easy to swallow and understandable manner. You've got Isla. So Isla is very similar to Datadog. They are a startup that actually boasts, I think they just went through their round D. They got, I think, $60-something million to, and basically what they do is they have over 100 large enterprise customers. So even as a startup, they've got over 100 enterprise customers already. And they've created a software framework that's designed to integrate collection and analysis of IoT data. You have other companies that I know you've heard of all of these, but these are companies you need to pay attention to because they are making movements in IoT. You've got Dell. They've pledged to spend $1 billion in research on new IoT products and solutions. You've got Fujitsu, which is on the verge of IoT platforms to solve a number of problems. They're working in the healthcare industry. They have large partnerships with Microsoft and Cisco. You've got Google. Obviously, I'm very skeptical on Google because they seem to not be very good product people. They're very good at what they do with data and search options, but products are still kind of hard for them to do. They've got cloud, but then you've got probably the number one is, everyone keeps asking me, should I keep still investing in Amazon? I think Amazon hasn't even begun to reach its potential. I mean, they're going to be releasing a number of other products in their attempt to basically take over the home. Recently they announced that they're going to release a smart microwave. They're going to do all of these other things, these data devices that they want to create and basically connect to Alexa and control your home. Honeywell, which a lot of people don't realize, is a company that makes the old thermostats, but they do so much more with IoT and have for years. They recently created a new center actually here in Atlanta, just for product innovations in IoT. So that's probably a good 8 to 10 companies that people need to be looking at, because if you're thinking about it, the $150 billion to potentially $2.5 trillion industries that these are going to become in the next 6 to 8 years, these are companies you need to be looking at investing in, because these are the companies that are going to be making money hand over fist by creating these devices. Chris, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what's really interesting about IoT, Internet of Things, is that it's a lot of things in one, right? So it's things like enterprise asset management, which is the ability to sort of evaluate what's happening on the ground when it comes to factories or apartments or buildings, and you can kind of know exactly what's happening with all your assets essentially in real time. Facility management, obviously, as well. Systems engineering, security lines, even actually, things like the Apple Watch or sensor systems, doorbell systems. These are all sort of a part of the IoT world. The connected computer, the connected refrigerator, the connected oven. This Internet of Things space is a lot of different things. So when we talk about Internet of Things companies, I think IoT is just something that is going to fall off the lips of everyone, because in some ways IoT is going to be everywhere. So, and that's why I think the companies are very broad, right? So think companies like Honeywell, which is an industrial firm, integration of digital technologies and manufacturing is particularly important for them. Hitachi is a Japanese technology conglomerate. They do very good consulting in the IoT space, and they try to get people, to turn into the enterprise of things. They're trying to get businesses to come over to an enterprise level amount of connections. And then even just the connections themselves, companies like Cisco, Comcast, T-Mobile, like you said, AT&T, these people that are the connecting nodes, the network systems around it, and security systems that make sure that those network systems work. Because obviously, once you have everything working on the IoT network, everything has to work. Everything has to work fluidly. You can't have any problems. Iridium Communications, I think NVIDIA is going to be a part of this as well. And indeed, really, any major IT, service delivery, service provider who can build platforms, build products for IoT, they're definitely going to be put in here. Obviously, you're going to think about folks like, my company, IBM, of course, Microsoft as well, Google and Amazon, and even Facebook, right? These companies, they have so much money, so much technology, so much good talent that they're going to have a place in the IoT world. So it's a huge space. I think we're just at the beginning of where it could go, and I think this is a worthwhile investment opportunity for sure. Okay, great. So for the interview segment of the podcast today, we have David Tal. So David is the founder and president of Quantum Run, a research and consulting agency that specializes in long-term strategic forecasting to help organizations thrive from future trends. David has been involved in organizational transformations across a range of sectors spanning from the government to media, developing a framework to better position organizations in a dynamic economy filled with accelerated disruption. And David currently oversees Quantum Run's marketing and special projects initiatives. And David, first and foremost, thank you for joining the podcast. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. But, you actually cover a lot on your website, Quantum Run. But, what I'd like to do is really concentrate your thoughts in the world of artificial intelligence, because I know you wrote a bunch of pieces on the future of AI. And this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, as well as Jack's. We talk about it all the time. And so when we when we started reading, your thoughts on AI, it really sort of spoke to us. So, I think I'll start out with this question,
Sure.
and you let me know how it makes for you anyway. So
Hmm.
you position AI as tomorrow's electricity, right? And I
Hmm.
mean, I think I have an idea what that means in my mind. But what does, AI as tomorrow's electricity mean to you? And why is that true?
Well, when I say that, what I mean is that every couple centuries, sometimes in millennia, humanity comes across a new technology that is almost like an ultimate enabler. So, in prehistoric times, that was fire, and fire allowed us to, cook meats. That allowed us to have higher calorie meals. That basically helped us to develop our brains, and potentially led to the cognitive explosion that happened, several millennia ago, that led to common man or current man. Then there was the discovery of electricity through the Industrial Revolution with steam power and everything like that, and then the internet, and then now AI, which I feel is an enabler, not just because it's a way to enhance intelligence. Almost intelligence is kind of becoming a commodity in some way, where whatever application needs an increase of intelligence, you're able to apply AI to it and either maximize the processes, improve the efficiencies. So, I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well in this case, but I just see that AI, or just enhanced intelligence, is is going to be an enabling technology or force, just as the internet was, just as electricity was, and just as fire was over the decades and millennia past.
Yeah, no, well, for sure, and I appreciate that. It's sort of hard to talk about something that is going to completely change the world and do it in a 2 to 3 minute soundbite. So,
Hmm.
I completely get it. How it's hard to sort of frame, right, this really penetrating technology that I think is going to affect just about every industry, corporate America, the government, and sort of how the world works. So that
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's a solid try for sure, right?
I mean, it is something that it is a technology that can be applied to anything, similar to electricity. And it is a technology that will work to maximize the efficiency and utility of everything it touches effectively. So that's why AI is so exciting, because it's just like how, over the past 2 to 3 decades, you could basically combine any industry or any product with internet and have a whole new industry. Today is basically the same thing, where you can apply artificial intelligence to any product or service, and have essentially create an entirely new product or service or industry based on that combination. So that's what these enabling technologies do, is they augment whatever is currently existing, and maximizes it to a point where it creates a variety of new possibilities.
Well, that's good, and I think that emphasis is really important to our listeners. And I think one of the other concepts that you speak to in your future of AI, and we'll actually link to it in our show notes when we put it on our website, is you talk about
Hmm.
artificial super intelligence, which I think even may be a new phrase for folks. So I'm wondering if you
Sure.
can sort of break down some of the differences and the different types of AI that are exist or may exist in the near future, and even the far future as well. So, and I see, can you tell us what's the difference between weak AI versus something like artificial general intelligence AGI, or this new one, artificial super intelligence? What are the difference between those three?
The differences are just a factor of degree. I mean, in terms of weak AI or artificial narrow intelligence, ANI, that is an AI that effectively specializes in one field or one task. It perceives and then acts on its environment or situation directly without a wider concept of the world around it. So whether it's your calculator, whether it's a single purpose app on your phone, whether it's the StarCraft AI you play against online, these are all examples of a single purpose, or these are all examples of an artificial narrow intelligence, because they are effectively experts at the one thing they were programmed to do. We're entering into a period, especially into the 2020s, where we're transitioning to extremely powerful ANIs. So a good example of this is the Google search engine. So it is unbelievably powerful at what it does. It's so good at providing us answers that it even it's able to figure out what you want to search for even before you type it in. And it's similarly, Facebook with its ability to present you with content that it knows you're interested in, or Netflix with its ANI that serves you content that matches your interests, Amazon's AI that matches you with products or services that you've bought before that you might need. And we're already starting to see this seep into our homes with the ANI that is powering our Alexa smart home speakers, or our Google Mini speakers at home. So the interesting thing about AI is that it's so hard to define because it's become so much a part of our daily lives. It's become so invisible. Similarly, it's almost like electricity, where it's so much enveloped our entire lives. It's so much a part of our day-to-day lives that we don't even think about it. It's become invisible to us. So the more we use these smart home technologies like the Google Minis or the Alexas and the virtual assistants on your smartphones, the less and less we think of these AI as AI. The more it's almost as the more we use AI, the more we no longer think of it as artificial intelligence. It's just another service or another utility. And sometimes it's hard to think of what real intelligence is, because the goalpost keeps getting pushed forward. And I guess things will change probably around the late 2030s or early 2040s, when we reach a point where we see the rise of the artificial general intelligence. So this is something called sometimes called a strong AI or human level AI. And the best way to visualize this is almost like a Data from Star Trek, or the T-800 from the Terminator. These are what's it called? These are a level of AI that will match humans in their ability to adapt to new situations and to pursue goals on their own. So unlike an ANI that is basically a single purpose computing device, an artificial general intelligence is basically a sentient being, very similar to humans, who are able to adapt to their surroundings and pursue whatever goals that they have been assigned, without needing a lot of data, without needing a lot of programming. They can basically figure things out on their own, without a lot of human intervention. And then a artificial superintelligence, which is the kind of last level of AI that a lot of these AI researchers talk about. This is a level of AI that would surpass human performance in every factor. Yeah, from logic to wisdom, from creativity to social skills. It'll be like comparing the smartest human genius, currently with an IQ of 120 to 160 to an infant, effectively. It is right now it's purely theoretical, but a artificial superintelligence will be the greatest intellect that has ever emerged in the known universe, or at least our perception of the known universe. So that's why it's so exciting, and also why it's so terrifying to AI researchers. Because the thing is, as humans, we're able to go to our local zoos, and we're able to visit some of the biggest and some of the most violent or most dangerous animals, not because we are physically stronger than these larger animals like your lion or your hippo, but because we are significantly smarter than these animals, and we're able to cage and control them. And so the fear is that if this theoretical future artificial superintelligence, if its future goals no longer align with the goals of humanity, will it see us in the same way as we see these zoo animals? Will it try to act counter to our best wishes, or will it one day try to control us in some way so that it can pursue its own goals in place of ours? So, that's a general overview of the three levels of AI that most AI researchers talk about these days. So the artificial narrow intelligence, or the ANI, the artificial general intelligence, the AGI, which is, again, pretty much every AI character in movies is basically AGI. And then the artificial superintelligence, which is the last level. And this level of intelligence isn't often depicted in our sci-fi films, but the closest thing to them would be Samantha from the movie Her, or the architect from the Matrix movies. So hopefully that gives you a good overview there.
Yeah, thanks so much. Go ahead,
David.
Jack. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we would love it. It's so. I mean, we talk about artificial intelligence a lot on this podcast, David.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we talk about is, obviously you can't talk artificial intelligence without bringing up Kurzweil and his 2045 singularity. Are you in agreement with his statement that we will reach that around that time? I mean, from the research you've done and the studying you've done, and you mentioned the 2030s and 2040s. Mm-hmm. Also, do you think there's a limit to what artificial intelligence is capable of, or we can't even fathom that?
Well, I think that's three questions in terms of Kurzweil's prediction. That seems accurate. I remember reading there was a 2013 survey of about, I believe it was around 500 of the top AI researchers, and their optimistic forecast of when an artificial general intelligence would be created would be around 2024. A modest forecast was 2040s or early 2040, and a pessimistic forecast was around the 2070s. Now, regardless of which of these camps you align yourself with, the the end message is that within our lifetimes we're going to invent this thing. So one way or another, as long as we don't screw ourselves over with some kind of massive epidemic, or a World War III nuclear war, something like that, we're going to see the emergence of an AGI and soon after an ASI, roughly around the 2040s to 2050s. So in that way, I'm in agreement there. In terms of the other question, I think it was whether we'd be able to understand AI or understand what they're thinking.
Yeah, fathom what it's capable of. Because we right now we think we know what it's going to be like, but is there going to be a limit to AI's abilities, or is it just continuously exponentially grow?
Well, I mean, it's two things. I mean, when we when AI researchers say they're going to create a intelligence of the magnitude never before seen in human history, I think what they're trying to say is they're going to be able to create a machine that has the potential to reach that level of intelligence. Intelligence. It's not like you can hook up like a bunch of supercomputers, turn it on, and automatically it's this super intelligent being. We're basically creating a machine. Eventually, they will create a machine with the right algorithms, with the right power, the right capacity, that has the potential to become super intelligence. But ultimately, it depends on the data that we feed into this AI and the sensors that we give this AI to perceive the world around it. So again, the level of intelligence that any AI will be able to achieve ultimately depends on the data that it is permitted to obtain and contextualize, and then the sensory organs that we permit it to have. So humans, we have a relatively set ceiling of intelligence based on our current biology. And that intelligence is fed by our sensory organs, be it our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our skin. But the thing is, our six main sensory organs, those aren't all the sensory organs that exist in the world. You can pick out a bunch of different animals in nature that have a range of different sensory organs that humans don't have. And in that way, they're able to perceive the world in a much more different way than we do. So, for example, your dog at home, he has a sense of smell that is significantly stronger than humans. So, your average dog, his world and his intelligence is shaped considerably around his sensory organ of smell. The bat works by, I think it's echolocation, and it doesn't even have very good eyesight to begin with. So its intelligence and its concept of the world is shaped by that sensory organ. Now, with an AI, we can give it all of these senses and much more. So we can give it access to all of these CCTV cameras, in a city or in a country or around the world. We can give it access to the sensory data of the satellites going around our planet. We can give it access to so many different types of sensors, not just one, but an infinite number, that this will shape the type of intelligence that we create. So that's one thing to consider, is that, again, this AI is going to be a product of the data that it is able to access and the sensory organs or the robotic body that we bestow upon it. Now, as a normal human, will we be able to understand how an AI thinks if this AI is able to make sense of 1,000 different images a second from thousands to millions of CCTV cameras around a city? Or will we be able to compare ourselves, or the way we think, against an AI that's able to access data from the entire world, or is able to understand information from well over 1 or 200 different languages? It's really impossible for us to compare ourselves to an AI in that regards, because it's just going to be so different than us. It's the best way to think of it is that an AI will be basically our first contact with aliens. because it'll be so different than us in terms of how it thinks, how it perceives the world, that we'll only be able to interact with it in a very simplistic way. I'm not really sure if I answered your question, but hopefully that covered at least some of it.
No, I think you did. And I think we could even get a little further here with the positioning. It's really Nick Bostrom's, but you went into it in your future of AI topic area, and it was Nick Bostrom's 3 separate artificial superintelligence forms. For my audience, or for our audience, the Oracle, essentially a highly functioning sort of Google search, ask a question, it spits it out to you. The Genie, a highly capable taskmaster, and the Sovereign, the sort of all-powerful, continuously operating, almost intelligence, quote unquote, drone, right? So and this might be a sort of a fun way to think about this. Which one of these 3 do you think is the most fantastic to think about? Which one of these 3 do you think is that we are closest to achieving? And which one of these 3 do you think may be the most dangerous?
Well, I guess for your listeners, I mean, the Oracle, we can, this is a kind of an ASI that we would interact with in much the same way as we do with the Google search engine. So again, like you said, we will ask it a question, no matter how complex that specific question, and the ASI will answer it perfectly in a way that's tailored to you and your question's context. In terms of the Genie that you just mentioned, this is where we assign an ASI a specific task, and it will execute it as commanded. So if we ask it to research a cure for cancer, done. If we ask it to find all the planets hidden inside the backlog of decades worth of NASA Hubble Space Telescope images, it can do that. If we want it to engineer a working fusion reactor to solve humanity's energy demand, boom, it really is like it really will be like a genie in that way. And then the last one I mentioned is Sovereign, and that's where the ASI is assigned an open-ended mission and given the freedom to execute it. And that's kind of like, if we ask it to steal the R&D secrets of a corporate competitor, it'll do that. If we ask it to discover the identities of all foreign spies hiding inside of our borders, it'll be on it. Ensuring the continued economic prosperity of the United States, no problem. In terms of Oracle, we pretty much already have that in terms of the Google search engine. And throughout the 2020s, Google search engine will continue to get better and better to a point where, for all intents and purposes, we will have an Oracle, for all of humanity. And it'll just be accessible on our phones or on our future AR glasses. But in terms of the Genie and Sovereign, that'll be closer to what a ASI would be able to execute. And in terms of all of these things will be possible. Whether it'll be good or bad really depends on the company or the government that controls it. But the one that, if I were to be worried about any of these AI, it would probably be Sovereign, because the thing about humans, especially when we first create the Sovereign, the risk is the governments or corporations that first create it might not know how to properly assign it to a task, and might give it a very vague or poorly thought out mission that it might be able to, that this ASI will then attempt to execute, but in a way that might be counterproductive to that specific company or to the country or to humanity as a whole. Because in order to execute one goal, it might do something else that we did not expect in a way that could be disadvantageous or potentially dangerous to a set number of people or humanity overall.
Yeah, Jack. I think you had the next question.
Yeah. So I was thinking that was pretty interesting assessment of what what could happen with the government and the sovereign. And I actually wanted to ask you about some ideas of what AI might be capable of in the next few decades, as far as being able to help solve problems that humanity has been facing or is facing, and maybe go into like what you think. Again, I like how we're saying like 20s, 30s, and 40s, those decades. Can you explain what you think AI might be capable of in those decades, as far as as an aid to humanity?
I mean, it's really any challenge that humanity is currently dealing with. AI would just act as a assistant to accelerate the eventual discovery of a solution to that challenge. Basically, any challenge that requires the computation of a huge amount of data or the assessment of a massive number of different variables, that would be the kind of challenge that a future AI would be able to tackle, cost effectively. Now, I'm assuming that by the late 2020s, early 2030s, we'll be able to invent a working quantum computer, which will accelerate the ability that will accelerate computation in a way that will be able to process a massive number of variables that current computers aren't able to crunch concurrently. And if a quantum computer is coupled with a artificial intelligence or an artificial superintelligence, this ASI will be able to tackle a wide range of problems that each might have a near infinite number of variables, and it might, potentially will be able to find a solution to all of these problems. So whether it is coming up with new drug combinations to tackle future diseases, for corporations coming up with the most efficient routes to ship products from one side of the planet to another, for astrology, we're coming out with increasingly more powerful telescopes that will be able to collect, giant amounts of visual data. And these ASIs will be able to crunch all of that data in near real time and help us to find, future planets, help us to, answer astrological and physics questions that are not currently possible with today's computational capacity. For biology, when it comes to mapping the genome and helping us to edit the human genome and plant genomes and animal genomes, these future ASIs, coupled with quantum computers, will be able to allow us to not only map these genomes, but also manipulate these genomes so that by the late 2040s, we'll be able to effectively create superhumans, genetically engineered humans with superior physical abilities and superior intellectual abilities in a way that is safe and in a way that can positively influence the forward progress of humanity. There really is an infinite number of possibilities, and like I mentioned earlier, the more AI capacity we have, the more possibilities we will discover to apply that AI or to apply that intelligence in order to make new discoveries or to simply make existing processes function that much more efficiently.
Man, that's really a fantastic way of framing it. So I really do appreciate that view. One thing I think would be helpful here is to talk about the role that the world has around artificial intelligence. Obviously, it has the ability to change not only industries, but really the world at large, countries, regions, how we interact with not only the Earth, but of course, everyone on it, as well as the universe. What role do you think governments and really the maybe the legal frameworks of the world have in developing an artificial intelligence or an artificial super intelligence? Do you think governments will be foundational to that? Will the corporate world play a bigger role? Some sort of combination or partnership? What do you think about how the world will tackle how to take on AI as it becomes more and more central to how we do life on Earth?
It's definitely a tough question. I mean, as of today, all of the most profitable companies basically are powered by AI at this point. Whether it is Amazon or Google, Facebook, Netflix, Microsoft, the majority of the value that these companies have been able to amass over the past decade, in particular, has been as a direct result of their use of AI. So it's a no-brainer that corporations will be one of the leading funders of further research into AI, just because there is a profit incentive behind it. However, when it comes to an intelligence on the scale of an artificial superintelligence, that is something that governments and militaries will probably want to be funding and are likely already funding under our noses, and it won't be something that will be overly advertised, because effectively an artificial superintelligence, the invention of the first artificial superintelligence will have the geopolitical significance of the invention of the first nuclear bomb. It will redefine the world in a significant way, because if you think of an ASI that could be applied to the military, you can assign this super artificial intellect to create the next generation of weaponry, or to plan a unbeatable strategy for one country to beat another country. It will be the ultimate weapon for any government to use against any adversary. So in many ways, that's why some AI researchers believe that the invention of the first ASI will be also the invention of the last ASI, because once we create this, whichever government is able to win that race to create the first artificial superintelligence will have an incentive to block any other government from getting that same technology. And just like how after the U.S. Created the first nuclear weapon, Russia was right behind it. Just as Russia was the first to land on the moon, the U.S. was the next after that. It will become a technology that no leading country or leading superpower will be able to exist without. And that's where potentially a future conflict may arise, because again, unless we figure out this whole world peace thing within the next 2 to 3 months, 2 to 3 decades, the invention of an ASI will be, again, on par or superior to the invention of a nuclear weapon, because effectively we can use it to create any future weapon or any future military strategy to defeat any opposing force. So that's where I think, in terms of where the future support for AI research will come from, first, obviously, from the corporate sector. But once future governments begin to wise up in terms of the potential of of AI, especially advanced AIs, it'll become a priority. It'll become a geopolitical priority for governments to fund these AIs to a point where they can serve as a ultimate weapon for their militaries or an ultimate enabler for their economies overall. Hopefully, I answer your question, but
no, this is great and very important too. And I think it may even dispel some of the the dangers of AI, and maybe even perk up some ears about what dangers we may not be aware of. Can you talk just a little bit about the fear factor? Obviously, we hear a ton from the Elon Musk and Stephen Hawkins of the world when it comes to AI. Do we have something to fear indefinitely? Do we have something to fear now? Or is it just like any technology? Obviously, there are dangers out there, but if we create the precautions now, we can ensure, or at least hope to ensure, that we won't create something that is uncontrollable. Can you talk a little bit about the fear factor when it comes to AI and whether we should be afraid?
Well, I mean, we should be afraid if we rush into the technology without really thinking it through. But at the same time, most AI researchers feel that the invention of an ASI level AI will only occur, earliest by the 2040s or 2050s. So the fact that we are overly obsessed with this topic right now kind of gives me the impression that with 1, 2, or 3 decades worth of stressing over it, we'll come up with some kind of solution to, either manage these ASIs or work cooperatively alongside them in a way that is beneficial to both, humanity and AI. One of the fears is that, some rogue terrorist group or some small, rogue nation like in North Korea will get their hands on an ASI and use it for nefarious ends. But the reality is, the hardware, the know-how needed to create these high-level AIs really only exist in developing countries. Realistically, the countries that have the highest probability of creating the first AGI or the first ASI will be the US, China, Japan, maybe Russia, maybe Korea, and that's pretty much it. Maybe a few wild cards in maybe Germany or Canada, but realistically, these AIs will emerge in developing countries, and these developing countries really depend on the world being a stable place. China, as much as it wants to be a superpower on par with the US, it doesn't want to do so to conquer the world. It just wants to, protect its own interests. The same with the US, the same with any other country. Prosperity comes from a thriving, interconnected world economy, not from one hegemonic force. So, if the US or China or Japan or Russia comes up with these ASI, for sure it'll use their ASI to support their own domestic objectives, whether that's military or economic. But it's not going to. These countries aren't going to use these ASIs to start World War III or something like that, because it just would be against their own interests economically. So, there won't be. I don't foresee any one country using their ASI to start the next war. It'll be impossible for a rogue nation or a terrorist group to invent their own ASI. So I don't think that is something that we need to worry about too much. And again, these AIs will only be as smart as the data or the sensory organs or robotic bodies that we provide them with. So we have the ability to control the limits of the intelligence potential, if you will, of these future AIs based on the data or the sensory organs we give it. And yeah, I mean, ultimately there are a lot of fears, but I'm fairly confident that over the next 1, 2, or 3 decades, we will come up with a range of options or solutions to either nullify these dangers or, significantly control them in a way that is comfortable for the future of humanity.
Yeah. So, I think this has been just a mind-blowing podcast for us, and yeah, I just thank you so much for joining us. It's actually nice to not only hear the fantastic future of AI, but also just hear some real truth. So this has been a really eye-opening one for me, and I'm sure for Jack as well. David, David, do you have anything to share in terms of new projects that you're working on, any talks or blog posts, anything for our leaders to check out?
Well, I mean, I would just recommend going to quantumrun.com, just reading more about the various forecasts and special features that we have written on that site. For people who are new to Quantum Run, quantumrun.com is a great resource, and it will become like a giant time suck because you'll be sucked from one article to another, one timeline to another. So it'll be definitely a fun read for anyone who is new to Quantum Run. And for the companies out there, I would recommend visiting quantumrun.com/consulting and learning more about the forecasting and research services that we offer, and see where we can collaborate. But other than that, I'm always on the road working on new speaking gigs. We are in the process of launching a new forum for our website to allow our readers to be even more engaged and communicate with each other on various futurism subjects. And probably next year, we'll be coming out with a new online educational series, kind of like an e-course about the fundamentals of futurism and forecasting, so that anyone with an interest in this topic will be able to learn the basics of how to create your own forecasts in a structured and scientific way.
Well, thanks so much, David. Yeah, I really, really do appreciate you joined the podcast. And trust me, I've been on Quantum Run. It definitely is a time suck, but it's
in a good way.
Yeah, no, in a good way for sure. And I'm actually looking forward to maybe talking to you about in the future with other things other than AI. So thanks a lot, David. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining SomeFuture.
Thank you. Take care.